Hey there, and welcome back to the Choose to Think Inspirational podcast. This is Victoria Lyden, your host, and today I'm going to do something really unusual. I'm going to read a chapter. It's chapter 17 from one of my favorite books. It's called The Secret Garden, and it was written by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Now, I believe that I'm allowed to read a chapter because this particular book my granddaughter and I listened to on it's an app, I guess, that you can get on your phone or a website. It's called LibriVox, and the books are read there, and they're free to use because they have exceeded they're in the public domain. So I'm thinking it's okay if I read this to you, but one of the reasons I'm going to read this to you, in addition to the fact that it's my favorite book, is because I wish you could see how I've marked up this entire annotated version of The Secret Garden, because I have all kind of notations and allusions and little keynotes and references along the way, because so much of what we talk about on the show is choosing to think, right? We talk about being transformed through the renewing of our minds. We talk about taking every thought captive and bringing those thoughts under submission of Christ. And okay, it's easy to say all of that, but it's much harder to actually do it. But this particular book is just replete with analogies and examples of just how to do that and the impact that choosing to think actually made on a small child, a young boy. And there's got such Christian overtones. I mean, like huge, easy to understand, easy to see Christian overtones along the way. But I'm always struck by the tenacity of Mary. And I'm not going to go into the characters and all of that, but if you've read it or if you've listened to it, then you'll know that who I'm talking about. It's Mary and then her friend Colin. And so this particular chapter is called A Tantrum. She had got up very early in the morning and had worked hard in the garden, and she was tired and sleepy. So as soon as Martha had brought her supper and she had eaten it, she was glad to go to bed. As she laid her head on the pillow, she murmured to herself, "I'll go out before breakfast and work with Dickon, and then afterward, I believe, I'll go to see him." She thought it was in the middle of the night when she was awakened by such dreadful sounds that she jumped out of bed in an instant. What was it? What was it? The next minute she felt quite sure she knew. Doors were opened and shut, and there were hurrying feet in the corridors, and someone was crying and screaming at the same time, screaming and crying in a horrible way. "It's Colin," she said. "He's having one of those tantrums the nurse called hysterics. How awful it sounds." As she listened to the sobbing screams, she did not wonder that people were so frightened that they gave him his own way in everything rather than hear them. She put her hands over her ears and felt sick and shivering. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do," she kept saying. "I can't bear it." Once she wondered if she would stop, if he would stop, if she dared go to him, and then she remembered how he had driven her out of the room and thought that perhaps the sight of her might make him even worse. Even when she pressed her hands more tightly over her ears, she could not keep the awful sounds out. She hated them so, and was so terrified by them, that suddenly they began to make her angry, and she felt as if she should like to fly into a tantrum herself and frighten him as he was frightening her. She was not used to anyone's tempers but her own. She took her hands from her ears and sprang up and stamped her foot. He ought to be stopped. Somebody ought to make him stop. Somebody ought to beat him, she cried out. Just then, she heard feet almost running down the corridor, and her door opened and the nurse came in. She was not laughing now by any means. She even looked rather pale. "He's worked himself into hysterics," she said in a great hurry. "He'll do himself harm. No one can do anything with him. You come and try, like a good child. He likes you." He turned me out of the room this morning, said Mary, stamping her foot with excitement. The stamp rather pleased the nurse. The truth was that she had been afraid she might find Mary crying and hiding her head under the bedclothes. That's right, she said. You're in the right humor. You go and scold him. Give him something new to think of. Do go, child, as quick as ever you can. It was not until afterward that Mary realized that the thing had been funny as well as dreadful. That it was funny that all the grown-up people were so frightened that they came to a little girl just because they guessed she was almost as bad as Colin himself. She flew along the corridor, and the nearer she got to the screams, the higher her temper mounted. She felt quite wicked by the time she reached the door. She slapped it open with her hand and ran across the room to the four-posted bed. You stop, she almost shouted. You stop. I hate you. Everybody hates you. I wish everybody would run out of the house and let you scream yourself to death. You will scream yourself to death in a minute, and I wish you would. A nice, sympathetic child would neither have thought nor said such things, but it just happened that the shock of hearing them was the best possible thing for this hysterical boy whom no one had ever dared to restrain or contradict. He had been lying on his face, beating his pillow with his hands, and actually almost jumped around. He turned so quickly at the sound of the furious little voice. His face looked dreadful, white and red and swollen, and he was gasping and choking. But savage little Mary did not care an atom. If you scream another scream, she said, I'll scream too. And I can scream louder than you can, and I'll frighten you. I'll frighten you. He actually had stopped screaming because she had startled him so. The scream which had been coming almost choked him. The tears were streaming down his face, and he shook all over. I can't stop, he gasped and sobbed. I can't. You can, shouted Mary. Half that ails you is hysterics and temper. Just hysterics, hysterics, hysterics. And she stamped each time she said it. I felt the lump. I felt it, choked out Colin. I knew I should. I shall have a hunch on my back, and then I shall die. And he began to writhe again and turned on his face and sobbed and wailed, but he didn't scream. You didn't feel a lump, contradicted Mary fiercely. If you did, it was only a hysterical lump. Hysterics makes lumps. There's nothing the matter with your horrid back. Nothing but hysterics. Turn over and let me look at it. She liked the word hysterics and felt somehow as if it had an effect on him. He was probably like herself and had never heard it before. Nurse, she commanded, come here and show me his back this minute. The nurse, Mrs. Medlock, and Martha had been standing huddled together near the door, staring at her, their mouths half open. All three had gasped with fright more than once. The nurse came forward as if she were half afraid. Colin was heaving with great breathless sobs. Perhaps he won't let me, she hesitated in a low voice. Colin heard her, however, and he gasped out between two sobs, show her. She'll see then. It was a poor, thin back to look at when it was bared. Every rib could be counted, and every joint of the spine, though Mistress Mary did not count them as she bent over and examined them with a solemn, savage little face. She looked so sour and old-fashioned that the nurse turned her head aside to hide the twitching of her mouth. There was just a minute's silence, for even Colin tried to hold his breath while Mary looked up and down his spine and down and up, as intently as if she had been the great doctor from London. There's not a single lump there, she said at last. There's not a lump as big as a pin, except backbone lumps, and you can only feel them because you're thin. I've got backbone lumps myself, and they used to stick out as much as yours do, until I began to get fatter. And I am not fat enough yet to hide them. There's not a lump as big as a pin. If ever you say there is again, I shall laugh. No one but Colin himself knew what effect those crossly spoken childish words had on him. If he had ever had anyone to talk to about his secret terrors, if he had ever dared to let himself ask questions, if he had had childish companions and had not lain on his back in the huge closed home, breathing an atmosphere heavy with the fears of people who were most of them ignorant and tired of him, he would have found out that most of his fright and illness were created by himself. But he had lain and thought of himself and his aches and weariness for hours and days and months and years. And now that an angry, unsympathetic little girl insisted obstinately that he was not as ill as he thought he was, he actually felt as if she might be speaking the truth. I didn't know, ventured the nurse, that he thought he had a lump on his spine. His back is weak because he won't try to sit up. I could have told him there was no lump there. Colin gulped and turned his face a little to look at her. Could you? He said pathetically. Yes, sir. There, said Mary, and she gulped too. Colin turned on his face again, and but for his long-drawn, broken breaths, which were the dying down of his storm of sobbing, he lay still for a minute, though great tears streamed down his face and wet the pillow. Actually, the tears meant that a curious, great relief had come to him. Presently he turned and looked at the nurse again, and strangely enough, he was not like a Rajah at all as he spoke to her. Do you think I could live to grow up? He said. The nurse was neither clever nor soft-hearted, but she could repeat some of the London doctor's words. You probably will if you will do what you are told to do and not give way to your temper and stay out a great deal in the fresh air. Colin's tantrum had passed, and he was weak and worn out with crying, and this perhaps made him feel gentle. He put out his hand a little toward Mary, and I am glad to say that, her own tantrum having passed, she was softened too, and met him halfway with her hand, so that it was a sort of making up. I'll go out with you, Mary, he said. I shan't hate fresh air if we can find, and he remembered just in time to stop himself from saying, if we can find the secret garden. And he ended, I shall like to go out with you if Dickon will come and push my chair. I do so want to see Dickon and the fox and the crow. The nurse remade the tumbled bed and shook and straightened the pillows. Then she made Colin a cup of beef tea and gave a cup to Mary, who really was very glad to get it after her excitement. Mrs. Medlock and Martha gladly slipped away, and after everything was neat and calm and in order, the nurse looked as if she would very gladly slip away also. She was a healthy young woman who resented being robbed of her sleep, and she yawned quite openly as she looked at Mary, who had pushed her big footstool close to the four-posted bed and was holding Colin's hand. You must go back and get your sleep out, she said. He'll drop off after a while, if he's not too upset. Then I'll lie down myself in the next room. Would you like me to sing you that song I learned from my Aja? Mary whispered to Colin. His hand pulled hers gently, and he turned his tired eyes on her appealingly. Oh, yes, he answered. It's such a soft song. I shall go to sleep in a minute. I will put him to sleep, Mary said to the yawning nurse. You can go if you'd like. Well, said the nurse, with an attempt at reluctance, if he doesn't go to sleep in half an hour, you must call me. Very well, answered Mary. The nurse went out of the room in a minute, and as soon as she was gone, Colin pulled Mary's hand again. I almost told, he said, but I stopped myself in time. I won't talk, and I'll go to sleep. But you said you had a whole lot of nice things to tell me. Have you? Do you think you have found out anything at all about the way into the secret garden? Mary looked at his poor little tired face and swollen eyes, and her heart relented. Yes, she answered, I think I have. And if you will go to sleep, I will tell you tomorrow. His hand quite trembled. Oh, Mary, he said. Oh, Mary, if I could get into it, I think I should live to grow up. Do you suppose that instead of singing the Ayah song, you could just tell me softly as you did that first day what you imagine it looks like inside? I am sure it will make me go to sleep. Yes, answered Mary. Now shut your eyes. He closed his eyes and lay quite still, and she held his hand and began to speak very slowly and in a very low voice. I think it has been left alone so long that it has grown all into a lovely tangle. I think the roses have climbed and climbed and climbed until they hang from the branches and walls and creep over the ground, almost like a strange gray mist. Some of them have died, but many are alive. And when the summer comes, there will be curtains and fountains of roses. I think the ground is full of daffodils and snowdrops and lilies and iris working their way out of the dark. Now the spring has begun. Perhaps. The soft drone of her voice was making him stiller and stiller, and she saw it and went on. Perhaps they are coming up through the grass. Perhaps there are clusters of purple crocuses and gold ones even now. Perhaps the leaves are beginning to break out and uncurl, and perhaps the gray is changing, and a green gauze veil is creeping and creeping over everything. And the birds are coming to look at it because it is so safe and still. And perhaps, very softly and slowly indeed, the robin has found a mate and is building a nest. And Colin was asleep. I cannot tell you how much I love this scene from The Secret Garden. All his life, Colin was thinking thoughts that were contrary to the truth. You know, the thing about being deceived is that when you're deceived, you don't know you're deceived, because that's the nature of being deceived. It's the nature of deceit. He was lied to. He was coddled. He created these lies. He overheard little snippets of adult conversations, and he concluded so many things that were just not true. Now, I'm just giving you one part of the story. I mean, his mother died when he was born, so he carried that guilt with him. And his father, his wife passed away, and he was so mournful over that he just quite nearly died of a broken heart. And he left Colin a lot. So Colin was there with the servants who took good care of him, of course, but he just basically stayed in a room, in bed, never went out, thinking that there was a horrible lump on his spine and that he would never walk. He just believed the lies. And I wonder, are you believing any lies? Are you believing any lies? Is there anyone who can step into your life like Mary did to Colin and say, there is no lump? There is no lump. Stop aligning your thoughts with your enemy. Don't put on the uniform for Satan's army. You know, I've lived a life and I've believed lots of lies in my lifetime. Matter of fact, I was just actually looking through an old journal, and at some of the lies that I had struggled with, not really not even too long ago. I don't know if I can find him. I wasn't really thinking about sharing this particular thing, but it was, I mean, it's, well, let's see. It's telling to me that I struggled so much with believing things like no one would ever love me, for example, or that I wasn't a good Christian. I might have thought that, I struggled to share my testimony and to be always authentic. And have you ever thought, like, if only people knew the real me, then they wouldn't really love me if they knew the real me. And, I mean, Satan will have a heyday when you're thinking those kinds of things. And when you have your focus on yourself. I was so addicted to self-focus and self-pity. And I say I was addicted to that because that was what I ate in the morning. It's what I ate as a snack. It's what I craved at lunch. And it's what I went to bed eating, that my evening meal, and then something to munch on later. It was self-pity and self-focus. And that's a really icky place to be. Colin, as I've just read you this particular excerpt, he was stuck in self-pity and self-focused. And he was believing the lies. He was believing there was a lump on his back and he would never walk and he would die. He wouldn't live enough to see the spring. He didn't have a future. He did not believe that he had a future. I have, had roots of rejection that I've dealt with, pride, so many issues. I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, my goodness, even the things that I deal with right now. I'm 60 and I still have, quote, issues. I'm still working out my salvation. I'm not perfect. I want to be. I mean, I don't mean like perfect, but I want to be like Christ. But too often I fall short. Maybe I gossip. Have you ever gossiped? Maybe I say something about somebody and I'm like, oh, why did I say that? Even the other day, I so value my time with my kids, and I was going to my granddaughter's swim meet. And have you ever gone to swim meets? They last forever, 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 forever. And, your swimmer may have 5 events, I guess. I'm learning the terminology now, like 5 events, and then each event has a heat. Well, what they do now, the parents actually get a Sharpie marker and they write the event number, like say it's event number 11, and then the heat number. So you have an E for 11 and then the letter H for the heat. That's like which group in that event, which group you go with, you swim with. So let's say it's event number 11, heat number 4. You're the 4th heat in that event. And then of course you've got to be assigned a lane, and maybe you go to lane 7. And so, they write this on their swimmers' arms. And so I was going to this wonderful thing because this was the championship with the conference, they call it. And it's when I guess there were so many teams swimming, and I wanted to go see my granddaughter swim. And I've been to a few of her meets along the way, but this was a biggie. And I wanted to go there and be there with her. And my goodness, I get there. I got there about 8:15 in the morning, but they really hadn't even started. So it's like you hurry up and wait, right? You go, you get there, but then you don't know, and you don't know how long each event is going to take. And they have age brackets, and they have guys and they have girls who are swimming, the boys and the girls who are swimming. And so instantly out of my mouth came, gosh, I should have brought my laptop. And I apologized for that comment later because I thought, gosh, Victoria, why did you say that? Because it gave the message that, and here I am with my granddaughter and my son-in-law at that time. My daughter hadn't arrived, and there I was. Why did I have to say in that moment that there was something else I could be doing instead of just enjoying their company? Ugh, I mean, it seems like that. My mouth just can really get me in trouble. It made me so sad because I don't want my granddaughter to think, oh, I can't just come and sit. I mean, she had brought a book because she's used to waiting. And then I thought, but why do I always have to be doing something? Why do I always have to be busy? Why can't I just sit and talk with my loved ones, with my family? I feel like I need to pause this so that I can get my voice to sound right. But anyway, that's just an example of sometimes I say things that I don't want to say, but I'm quicker now to apologize and to try to make amends, and because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings either, or minimize the importance of just being with them. But that's kind of what I did. But I lived under so many lies, and I called it putting on the outfit, suiting up with the enemy in my thoughts. And that's really what Colin had done, so much so that he had convinced himself that he was actually going to die, and that, where was spring? Is it really true? Is it really true that I can live to grow up? This was his dawning. This was a shift for him, because finally someone told him there is no lump. And that changed everything for him. And from that day on, actually, I mean, there are, I don't know how many chapters, probably 20 some, if not more. Let me look, I'm just glancing. I don't remember exactly how many there are, but yeah, there are 27. So I read chapter 17, and maybe I'll have to come back and read another chapter. I've always wanted to read for LibriVox, but the gal who reads The Sacred Garden, she does such a good job, and I thought maybe that's what I would like to do someday, is just read books. But this is the one that I think I would go for first. But at any rate, I'm not trying to be harsh either by saying there is no lump, but is there an area in your life, in your thought life, where you are really focused on yourself? Is there an area where you feel so sorry for yourself that you can't quite get beyond it? And I'd like to be the person who says there is no lump. And I would encourage you to say, okay, to entertain the thought that there could be a different way of living. Maybe you feel stuck. Maybe I've been trying to eat healthy, and the pounds just keep creeping on, and you can't lose the last few that you're aiming to lose, and maybe your feet hurt and you can't go play pickleball or do what you want to do to, like exercise, and maybe just 1,000 hurdles are in the way for you to do what you really want to do. Maybe you're stuck at a job you don't like. Maybe you're struggling with all the children that you have underfoot, and you're like, oh my goodness. Maybe you're overwhelmed and your emotions are raw. Maybe you're sitting with a loved one who's dying. I mean, I can think of just so many scenarios that would be terribly, terribly difficult to endure. And I want to be the first to say, I'm so sorry. But, there are scenarios. I'm not going to say, oh my goodness, you're sitting with someone who's really ill and that you're self-focused. That sounds absurd. That's not at all what I'm saying. But for me personally, I got myself into a really bad spot by focusing on myself. I think those thoughts really are what led to my depression back in 2016. And thank goodness that, because thoughts led me there, my thoughts also were able to lead me out. And really, that's how my ministry was birthed. But I don't know, I want to just encourage you on the one hand, and I want to also just, not in a forceful way say there is no lump, but in an encouraging way, and in a thoughtful way, and in a loving way say, are you sure there's a lump? Because you keep saying there's a lump, and maybe there's no lump. Maybe there's no lump. Maybe you can shift your focus and your perspective. Maybe you can ask someone else to take a look at what's going on with you, to give that outside perspective. I hope that you have someone honest in your life, someone who will speak truth to you and who knows you and who's just going to tell you, even though they might hurt your feelings, or even though what they have to say to you is really hard. I hope you have someone in your life who loves you just that much, who will tell you, look, enough is enough. Let's shift. Let's move. I love this book. I absolutely love it. I have so many. It's an annotated version. It was actually published in 2007. I think I bought it used on Amazon, and it has, not only is it annotated, but it's illustrated as well with some of the original just drawings. And the author, her life, oh my goodness, even just reading about her life is quite telling. She's just incredible. So I just read chapter 17, and even some of the annotations that it has, it's as she's talking. Let me see if I can. I mean, Mary is just so funny in there, isn't she? She's just a hoot and just stamping her feet like that, and kind of, the whole thing, hysterics. And they used to call hysterics in the 19th and early 20th century. Medical practitioners applied the term hysteria to a wide variety of symptoms, and its use goes back thousands of years. It was generally used to cloak issues of female sexuality, but what is interesting here is the way Collins' eventual overcoming of the symptoms as he approaches adolescence mirrors a move from hysterics, physical inactivity, the indoors, heavy association with his mother, to other types of things like physical fitness, bodybuilding, erudition, a fascination with science. And by the end of the book, when he reunites with his father, he becomes like a real boy. So there's that slow change that's seen in him. And the early death of his mother, as well as the whispers of the doctor and servants, have convinced Colin that he will die as a child. This wasn't necessarily a far-fetched fear because child mortality rates were very high. James Walvin writes that death of the young as well as the old was an inescapable social reality in 19th century England, and as a result, it was never very far away from their thoughts and imaginations. So, this particular chapter ends with the nest, right? And the birds are coming to look at the nest, to look at the flowers, to look at the leaves. They're finding mates, they're building a nest. And, maybe it's time for you to build a nest. Maybe it's almost time for joy to erupt. What hope or what thread has taken root in your heart? Is your heart and is your mind, are they about to bloom? So when you realize that, okay, there's no lump, I'm not going to self-focus, I'm not going to self-pity anymore, I'm not going to believe the lies, then you have so many truth-filled, life-giving thoughts to replace all of those lies with. And if you can begin to focus more on those truth-filled, life-giving thoughts, then your spring is coming, and it's time to build a nest. It's time to have hope and joy, because all of that is about to explode in your life. And that's what I would like for you, and that's what I pray for you. So let me just pray as I close. Father in heaven, this is really kind of just an episode that's a little bit different, but maybe the point is all the same. Father, we need you. We need you at every turn in our lives. We love you. We desire you. We know your word is true. Your word is living and active. We know that as we study your word and read your word and memorize your word and come to you and talk to you and pray to you and communicate with you, that we want to know and focus on thoughts that are true, thoughts that are filled with life and love and forgiveness and peace and comfort and joy. And Father, we ask that you would help us to think about all of these types of things. Help us to take our thoughts captive when we fall short. Help us to keep a short stick on just asking folks to forgive us. Sometimes that's just what we need to do. Lord, help us to continue to be authentic among our friends and our family, to speak truth to them in love, and to also not be so prideful that we cannot hear when truth is spoken to us in love. Help us to take criticism and to learn. Lord, I ask that you would have your way with every listener, with their hearts and their minds, that you would blanket them with your protection. Lord, your word says that love covers over a multitude of sin. Would you make that so in our lives, where we goof, where we feel stuck, where we just can't get the engines rolling, the wheels rolling, nothing's turning on, nothing's working right, and everything seems amiss. Help us to pull back from that and to rest, to soften our hearts, to listen for your voice, and to see our many blessings. And yes, we can count our blessings, we can be grateful, and we can still not feel quite right all at the same time. But Lord, I ask that you would heal our hearts to the uttermost, that you would bring such an epiphany to our minds, clarity of thought and mind for all areas of our lives, wherever we're struggling right now. For that one who is struggling, that you would be the way maker, the truth giver, and that your love would just fall over them. Father, help us to go through things and learn, not to run around them and be distracted and try to, get over, under, whatever, but not go through. Help us to go through, because when we know we go through things, we go with you. We go with you where you go with us wherever we are, which means we're with you. Thank you. Lord, bless every listener and bring joy to their hearts and their minds. Help them to entertain the thought, maybe, just maybe, there's no lump. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.